Hi, my name is Emiko Hori, Software Engineer Manager at Commerce Hub. Today, we're going to be exploring the application called Gerrit. This is a Gerrit 101 workshop. We're going to be covering what is Gerrit, why Gerrit, Gerrit step by step, and we're going to go over some fantastic features of Gerrit UI, and hopefully I can cover enough material for you to get started with Gerrit. Now, what is Gerrit? Gerrit is web-based, free collaborative team code review tool. There is nothing better than free, right? It was originally developed by Sean Pierce as a Google project. To be exact, it was for Android project. Evidently, this project was a huge success that Google decided to open to an entire community. Thank you, Google. You are absolutely amazing. The name Gerrit came from Gerrit Rietveld, a Dutch architect in 1900s. So why Gerrit? Because Gerrit has some interaction code review process. It makes the code review process really fun. With the Gerrit UI, developer and the reviewer can see all the status of the code changes and code reviews in the repository and branch levels. Not only that, the Gerrit server integrates really well with the CI tools. For example, I use the TeamCity, and the communication between the Gerrit server and TeamCity is very smooth. So the continuous delivery gets really seamless. Now, Gerrit server can act as the part of the Git repository. Here is an overview of how Gerrit can integrate with the CI. Now, please keep in mind that this is only one example of the integration. I'm sure there are thousands of ways to integrate in your system according to your requirements and your components. For this particular model, the developer can create the branch in his or her own machine and make changes and do the push to the Gerrit server. When that happens, the Gerrit server starts to push and start the build and deploy. When the build and deploy happens, the reviewer can start making comments and do the scoring system. That is a code review. When the reviewer thinks it's passed, yes, then the developer can submit the code and finally go to the Git repository. If reviewer doesn't think it's a good enough code, then he or she can push it back to the developer and start all over again. For this particular model, we use the Gerrit Linux server Ubuntu 14.40. Now you might be thinking, well, that sounds like a lot of work, a lot of steps. Why do we have to bother with this kind of process? And that is a good question. Then here comes the benefit of Gerrit. Gerrit is just like the gate. Before that final push, that final submit to the main repository. By having the gates like this, in this particular model, the build path is ensured. And because of these gates, deploy failure is not going to happen in the main repository. Therefore, we can maintain the high quality code. Now let me walk you through the Gerrit code review process step by step. In this particular model, developer can create the local branch. Oh, by the way, the minimum requirement to have this is you have to have the Git repository. As you see, the syntax Git branch, there's nothing special because this is the normal syntax as the regular Git. The next step is a new step. In order to incorporate with a Gerrit, we have to create the branch, the exact same branch name as the local branch in Gerrit server. And the syntax is this, SSH-P. And now we see 29418. Do you know what this 29418 is? Any idea? Now this is a default port number for the Gerrit server. Every time we have to have a communication with Gerrit server, we have to have this magic number, 29418. And we have to have a parameter associated with the project name and the branch name. Or, if you prefer doing so, we can also use the Gerrit UI to create the branch. Either way should work fine. Then, the developer can make code changes. After the code change, developer can finally push the commit to Gerrit server. Now, this syntax git push is very similar to the regular git. However, we also need that magic number 29418 as you see. Also, we have a new parameter, head colon refs /for/ and branch name. If we do not provide this parameter, the git push may happen in local branch, but it may not push it to the Gerrit server. Therefore, this particular commit will not be in the final main repository. So please be aware of that. As you see, there is a URL http://gerrit/263. Now, this 263 is a special ID associated with this particular commit. And every commit has unique identifier, just like this. It's called a change ID. So for the life of this particular commit, this change ID will remain as is. And the nice thing is, by going to this URL with the Gerrit UI, we can be able to see the status of this particular commit. In this particular model, right after that git push, right after that commit, the CI server start cranking in and start building. And at the same time, we can start assigning the code reviewer. This is a time to get onto the Gerrit UI. And in the UI, we can see the owner information, which is you. And the reviewer section, you can be able to add the reviewer who you want somebody to review your code. When the reviewer has been assigned using the Gerrit UI, reviewer immediately receives the notification, the email notification saying, please review my code. Now, for each process using the Gerrit server, we're gonna get email notification for every activities. For example, when the build get rebuilded, or the deploy was successful, or when the reviewer makes a comment, and so on. So, please be ready to be spammed by the Gerrit server. For the Gerrit code review process, there is a code review scoring system. As you see in this chart, the scoring system is from the -2 to +2. Now, -2 means this code shall not be merged. It's bad, pretty bad, and we have to push it back. And -1, also, I would prefer this not to be merged and push it back to the developer. Now, 0 is no score. You might think no score is okay, but in this particular case, it's not okay. In order to make this successful, the minimum requirement to pass is the +2. which is looks good to me. Approved. Now, let me talk about this positive one. This is looks good to me, but I rather someone else see this code. Now, this is particularly useful when you would like a second set of eyes to review your code. Also, this would be helpful when you would like your managers or team leads or your peer to have a second set of eye, or anybody who is a owner or really professional in that particular part of the component to see your code. That said, we don't have to have just a single reviewer. We can have multiple reviewers being assigned. Now let me talk about this positive 1 and positive 2 cases. These are not associated with any of the calculations. So, for example, reviewer 1 scored positive 1, and the next reviewer scored positive 1. And positive 1 and positive 1 does not mean that is positive 2. Which means the minimum requirement is positive 2. So the final reviewer have to push the button of the positive 2. Yes, in the Gerrit UI, there is a radio button for the positive 2 to be pushed. As I explained it before, in this particular case, the code review score label is -1, which means we have to push it back to the developer, so he or she has to make changes again. Now, the other scoring system, in this particular case, build and deploy, the positive ones are green. So, anything else besides code review, the scoring label is the ranges from -1 to +1. In this case, this is a criteria of submit. This is ready to go, which means all the labels have the color green. As you may have noticed, on this particular model, each commit, each push becomes each build lifecycle. So each commit becomes its own build, deploy, and code review process, pass, fail, and submit and go. In the Gerrit UI, there is a history section that we can keep track of any of the status changes. For example, if the build happened to break in this case, we can go to the history, and history has the associated URL or other information associated with the particular CI tools. And the URL can lead into the CI tools information. So we can be able to drill down even further to troubleshoot if there is any problem. Now let me go over some of the terminology of the Gerrit. Term change means a unit of review. Every Git commit will have the change ID associated with it. Do you remember the change ID? Yes, each commit has that unique identifier, and you can associate that number when you go to the Gerrit UI. Patch set means a revision of a change. The first revision is patch set 1. Label. It's a rating category that allows or blocks progress of a change. So in this particular model, we use the word build, deploy, and code review. And these are called labels, but you don't have to name on this build or deploy. You can name it any way you want. You can name it cats or dogs or even Darth Vader. Score. The rating given to a label. For some labels, it ranges from -1 to +1, just like a build. That allows or blocks depending upon how you configure the gates. The code review is from -2 to +2. Term submit means merges a change into a repository. Until this happens, the code is outside of that repository. Abandon means we can archive the change, and you can change your mind later on and put it back. The term project in Gerrit means a Git repository. Okay, are you ready to explore some of the fantastic features of the Gerrit UI? Ta-da! Here it is! The Gerrit UI login page. Wow! Yes, this is a very simple login page. Very straightforward. After you log in, you get to see the overall changes of the code review process in the repository and each branch level. In this particular page, I went to the My menu, and under My menu, I went to Changes. As you see, there is the Ongoing Review section and Incoming Review section. Ongoing review means that I made some changes on the code, and I would like somebody else to review my code. The incoming review is that somebody else made a change, and that particular person wants me to review his or her code. Recently closed one is the one which has been successfully pushed to the main repository. On the right-hand side of the Gerrit UI, you get to see this grid section. This is a code review labels example, and labels can be highly customizable, as I explained it earlier. So B in this case stands for build, CR stands for code review, and D is deploy. Yes, and you can name any name you want. It's highly customizable. Yes, it is highly customizable. See, you can name as cats or dogs if you want. Now I drill down further to one of these code review change set. As you see, you get to see the owner of that change set. And reviewer section, we can add any reviewer we want. This is a way to add a reviewer. In the reviewer section, you can add the reviewer's email address, if there's single reviewer or multiple reviewers, and you can click add. And right after click add, the email notification will be sent immediately to the reviewer saying, please review my code. You can further drill down to the file section. In each file section, you can see the particular code base and code changes. You can make and add comments to any of the code itself, like line by line if you want. If you want to make comments to an entire file, then you can see the middle section. There is a little yellow rectangle that you can push. And after clicking that, you can make a bulk edit to add comments. Here is the add review scoring system. As I mentioned before, there are 5 radio buttons from -2 to +2. So, in order to pass this code review process, the final reviewer has to click the +2 and post. After the code review has been approved, and make sure all the criteria is green, then there is going to be a submit button available in the Gerrit UI. Now, this submit button is the most powerful button within the Gerrit UI. Because if none of these criteria are passed, the submit button doesn't even show up. Isn't that great? This makes the code review process mandatory in order to get that code into the Git repository. As I mentioned before, The history for the troubleshooting section is at the bottom of the Gerrit UI. As you see, you can start clicking and drill it down to the related URLs or some of the file information. In some particular case, you can actually link to the URL associated with the CI tools. As you see, this is the reason why Gerrit UI is so powerful. By looking at the all open section, you get to see all of the status of all of the project, all the branches, what kind of thing went wrong, and which commit did not pass the code review, and which one did not even complete the code review. And in some particular cases, which one was failing for the build or deploy, or whichever label you use. Now let me summarize the high level of the Gerrit UI functionality. We went over to the login to the Gerrit, and we had a menu and submenus available. And then we went over the outgoing reviews and incoming reviews. We went over some of the label strategies. Remember the cats and dogs? And we have talked about adding the code reviewers and also flipping through the codes to be reviewed. And in this particular model, we apply the build and deploy check with a CI, and this can happen automatically. And then Gerrit UI has a troubleshooting feature for any of the labels that you implement. And there is a powerful, very powerful submit button that makes this Gerrit UI extremely amazing. Yes. And we talked about some of the scoring system and difference between the +1 and +2. Okay. So let's get started with Gerrit. Are you ready for this? In order to start with the Gerrit server, we require SSH key. The SSH key is how Git will authenticate with Gerrit. And you may already have this SSH keys if you're already familiar with Git repository. And usually that can be found in the SSH file folder. If not, then you can open up the Git bash shell and run ssh-keygen and follow the prompts. And after that, the generated key you want to apply in the Gerrit UI's settings of the SSH public keys and paste it over to Gerrit UI. After you pasted the SSH key, you may want to test the Git connection. And syntax is SSH-p and the magic number 29418. And if this syntax generates this type of the result, you are a success. If not, you may want to check the connectivity between you and the Gerrit server. Then, you may want to move existing repository to Gerrit. In order to do so, you need to create a project using the Gerrit UI. Just like on this page, there is a Create Project section on the UI. And after created that, you want to fetch the latest from the GitHub or your GitLab repository locally. And then add the remote repository for Gerrit and push all the branches to the Gerrit server. And syntax is this, with the magic number 29418. Occasionally, you may get this type of the error that unpack failed, error java heap space 55. In that case, the number heap limit might be a little too small, so you may want to configure going to the Gerrit config file and apply much higher number than that. And after that, you can restart the Gerrit server. After you push the entire Git repository to Gerrit server, you want to do git clone and clone everything locally. The syntax is git clone SSH, username at Gerrit, and that magic number. In order to apply the change ID for every commit using Gerrit, we need to configure the commit hook. And the syntax is this: scp-p-p, and the magic number, and Gerrit hooks commit msg, and git hooks. Another hook we need is for the merge commits. And you can create the file, git file, hooks prepare commit msg, and the syntax is just like this. Let me talk briefly about the Gerrit UI and TeamCity configuration. In the CI tool, you can go to any of the project information, and in editing the VCF root, in the case of TeamCity, we can go to the fetch URL and you can identify that magic number, right? Yes, you want to apply the Gerrit server name with this particular project name incorporated with it. A very important thing to note here is, in order to integrate the Gerrit server with the CI server, the user and email information has to be in sync between the Gerrit server and the CI tool. So you can be easily check that status of the email and user information by git config. And if it's not in sync for the both servers, in the Gerrit server you may want to configure so that the user and email information is same as the CI tool. Otherwise, the integration between these two servers will not be successful because these user information are the one the Gerrit server is reading from. I hope you enjoyed the Gerrit and Gerrit UI functionality. As you see, there are a wealth of information in the internet available, and there are tons of YouTube videos out there. And in particular, I really like this book called Learning Gerrit Code Review. It's the bottom of this list. If you have any further questions, please shoot me an email or Twitter. My name is Emiko Hori. Thank you.